Ladies and gentlemen, without preamble, do we begin today? For we have many things to do today, and I wasn't actually planning to be reading this book today. So today we shall be doing things that we are doing today. Oh, and my friend just won a Hearthstone match. I'm on Battle.net, obviously, as you can tell, because we're in World of Warcraft as we speak! Oh my god. I should probably send out a tweet, shouldn't I? Maybe I should. What do you guys think? Should I tweet while I'm streaming? Hang on. That's what all the hip kids are doing, is what I hear. Hang on. Let's see here. Dear viewers, you rock. I haven't actually loaded it yet. Still working on it. Still working on it. Are we live? You know what? I don't even care. We're just going to get going. Okay. Actually, you know what? I should probably do this. Why am I doing that? Why would you ever tweet on your phone? It's, like, better in every way to tweet on the computer. I don't know why you would tweet on the phone. It's so weird. Because I can actually type on the computer. There's this thing called a keyboard that's on the computer. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's this great new thing they just invented. I'm a little energetic this morning because I've been running around like a frickin' maniac since 7. Trying to get some review videos done for next week and for about 4 weeks after that. Alright. There. Tweet sent. Let's do it. Leroy! When we last left our party, the Horde, if you've been paying attention, was slowly losing. Now, I like this, by the way. So, some people have been... if you've actually read some of the diatribes of Warcraft 2 in the lore versions, you may have noticed that it describes a situation in which the Horde was winning. Just winning. And the only thing that prevented their win in the original canon was the fact that Orgrim insisted on dealing with Gul'dan. That was the only reason the Horde lost the Second War. They were winning by a landslide, they pulled back their forces, and then they started losing slowly. What we're seeing is a much more fleshed out, gray, in-depth, and generally more sense-make approach here in the Chronicles, because what's been happening is they've been doing this slow... They did this slow advance through Khaz Modan and left behind some of their troops. And then they did this slow advance on the sea and lost some of their troops. Then they had an extensive battle in Hillsbrad and lost some of their troops. Then they headed up through Hinterlands and left behind some of their troops to deal with the Wildhammers. And then they sent even more of their troops up to Quel'Thalas. And then, of course, they were like, okay, and this whole time, the Horde is just slowly shrinking. No reinforcements, no additional thing. And it is the entire extended Horde that is moving here, at least as far as what is left. Also, funny fact, you know how I've talked about how there's like 5 Hordes in the past? Thanks to Chronicles, there's now another Horde, because the demonic Horde was the Horde that was run by Blackhand and Gul'dan. Orgrim's Horde has now pretty sufficiently separated itself from the demonic Horde to be called a separate Horde now, which actually kind of makes more sense then for why Thrall would go ahead and call it, you know, the Horde when it comes to Warcraft 3. But as we left things, what had just happened is they had failed to breach Silvermoon City, so Orgrim pulled his forces back and ordered them to march west. This time, the time had come to resume his campaign and attack Lordaeron's capital, and the war chief had found a way to the stronghold. The roads and valleys between Quel'Thalas and Lordaeron were the easy routes to take if one sought the capital, but also heavily fortified. Those would actually be just up there, is what he's referring to. The areas we now refer to as the Eastern and Western Plague Lands. It didn't used to be called that, obviously. Orgrim would not take them. He would move his armies through the rugged Alterac Mountains, which we're staring at, actually, and move straight to the south of Lordaeron's capital, giving him the element of surprise. Thank you, Lava Dude. Not all of Doomhammer's allies agreed with the plans. Zul'jin and the Amani rejected the war chief's call to go west. Their hatred of the elves burned so hot, they refused to abandon the siege of Silvermoon. Zul'jin vowed that he would attack Lordaeron's capital only after all of Quel'Thalas was in flames, and he held King Anastarion's severed head in his hands. Zul'jin's stubbornness was both infuriating and troubling. Doomhammer had relied heavily on the Amani to guide the orcs through a land that was not their own. Losing the trolls at this critical moment could spell doom for the Horde. Gul'dan sensed Orgrim's mounting fears. The warlock knew that now was his chance to finally break free from the Warchief's control. Gul'dan convinced Orgrim and Zul'jin that the Stormreaver clan had found a new way to destroy the barrier around Silvermoon City. All it would take would be a few more days. Once the Stormreavers had succeeded, the Elven City would fall. The trolls could sate their appetite for vengeance, and then they could rejoin the Horde. Doomhammer was loath to leave even more of his forces behind in Quel'Thalas, but Gul'dan's words swayed him. The Alliance was still scattered. Some of their forces were in Silvermoon, some of their forces were in the hinterlands. Lordaeron was ripe for the taking, and Doomhammer could not allow this opportunity to slip through his fingers. Doomhammer left Gul'dan and the Stormreaver clan to unravel the barrier, but he ordered the Dragon Maw to stay in Quel'Thalas and keep watch over the Warlock. If the barrier had not come down in 3 days' time, they would force Gul'dan and his followers to march west. And if Gul'dan was foolish enough to disobey, Doomhammer gave the Dragon Maw permission to feed him to their war mounts. Doomhammer led his forces west, his mind plagued by doubts. Since the landing in Hillsbrad, things had not gone according to plan, but he knew that was the way of war. Those who adapted found victory, and those who refused to change were destined for defeat. When the Horde entered the mountains, fortune smiled. Sorry, this is hilarious, really. On Doomhammer, Alterax's king, Paranold, was waiting for the Orcish army, and he carried offers of an allegiance. From the beginning of the Second War, Paranold had been wary of fighting the Horde. He believed the Orcs were an unstoppable force. His fear of the Horde had only deepened as he learned of Death Knights and Red Dragons and Ogre Magi in its ranks. The Horde's arrival in the Alterac Mountains had finally pushed Paranold to betrayal. Rather than fight his enemies, he would strike a deal with them. He would survive. Paranold met the Horde to deliver a simple message. He would grant the Orcish army safe passage through the mountains if Alterac would be spared the Horde's wrath. Orgrim eagerly accepted the offer, and Paranold showed the war chief how to avoid the defensive positions throughout the mountains. Night and day, the Horde marched through Alterac's unguarded passes, and when they finally reached the Tirisfal Glades, Orgrim gave his forces no rest. He threw every soldier in his command at the capital city's wall. Now, I need to comment on something really quick here. This is pretty much demonstrable proof of the fact that the Orgrim's Horde, specifically Orgrim's Horde, which I'm just going to start referring to as Orgrim's Horde because I don't have a term for it yet, was willing and capable of bartering and bargaining. If you remember, one of Orgrim's main motivations, as listed in this book, for going to war was the fact that he believed that there was no possibility that the northern nations would negotiate. Now, do keep in mind, I'm not saying they should have negotiated. Remember that this is a foreign force that has invaded and claimed an entire region of an entire nation and killed a lot of people. And they're still suffering from fell situations. So I'm not saying the humans should have bartered. What I am saying is that this is something that is kind of unique, in the fact that there's no real bad guys here other than Gul'dan and a few other specific individuals. This is a lot of people who feel they have no choice, fighting a lot of people who need who feel like they have no choice. And I kind of like that, actually. So yes, Orgrim is demonstrably getting desperate at this point in time. Now, the Tirisfal Glades didn't look like this back then. This is what they look like now, after the Scourge. By the way, I have received confirmation of a sort that the third book will cover everything from Warcraft 3 to Wrath of the Lich King, which makes sense, because if you think about it, everything from Warcraft 3 up to Wrath of the Lich King is the story of Arthas Menethil. It really is. I mean, there's a lot of other significant characters, there's a lot of other significant events, but ultimately he is the main character of that arc, which is funny, because it's actually not Thrall, as some people would presume, but I digress. So there's the capital city. Not quite how it looked, but as you can see, I mean, there's still some of the damage here from when the Scourge came through, but just try to imagine that damage was done by the Horde. Turellian and his allies had long suspected the Horde would eventually pivot west and strike at Lordaeron's capital. Their fears were confirmed when Orgrim and most of his forces suddenly pulled back from Quel'Thalas. Though the elements of the Horde army were still rampaging through Quel'Thalas, Turellian ordered the bulk of his soldiers to move west with all due haste. With half of the Alliance army battling in the hinterlands, the task of defending Lordaeron's capital fell to him. At first, reaching the city before Orgrim did not seem so... That is a weird sentence structure. Reaching the city before Orgrim did not seem so impossible. Blah. The Horde had ventured into Alterac Mountain, and the region's defenses would slow the war chief. Then word of King Perinold's betrayal reached the scattered Alliance forces. No one could believe it was true. No one could fathom any human would pledge loyalty to the bloodthirsty Horde. But it was true. The implications were disastrous. With the Alterac Mountains fully barricaded, Doomhammer's journey west should have taken months. With safe passage, his soldiers had already reached Lordaeron's capital. Turellian feared that the city would fall before he could save it, but Lordaeron was not as helpless as he believed. King Tyrannus was actually a pretty awesome, smart guy. He just got a little worn down by Warcraft 3's time. Though he was not a warrior, he was a man of great charisma and great cunning. As Horde catapults bombarded the capital, Tyrannus told his people that this battle would decide the war, and he was right. The future of humanity, the future of the Alliance, rested on their shoulders. Tyrannus himself vowed to die if it meant keeping the Horde at bay until reinforcements could arrive. Against the wishes of his advisors and nobility, he took his place on the ramparts and organized the city's defenses. Orgrim admired Lordaeron's tenacity. The humans and their king fought with a fearlessness akin to that of the orcs. Yet it wouldn't last. Every day, Orgrim whittled away at the capital's defenses. Every day his siege engines pounded the stronghold's crumbling walls. Once the Horde reinforcements arrived from Quel'Thalas, the city would fall. The question was only when those troops would arrive. Dragonmaw, Stormreaver, and Twilight's Hammer were all behind schedule, and Doomhammer had not received word from them. Something was not right. Doomhammer felt it in his bones. His unease deepened when Turellian and his army approached from the east. Their arrival distracted the Orcish forces, giving the capital defenders much-needed rest. Doomhammer did not fear Turellian or his forces. He feared what their appearance meant. The other Alliance armies were en route to the capital. The Horde had to breach the stronghold soon. Orgrim had the Death Knights at his disposal, but he also needed the rest of his soldiers from Quel'Thalas to secure victory. He would never get them. The Dragonmaw arrived outside Lordaeron's capital bearing dire news. Gul'dan had betrayed the Horde. This is my surprised face. He had taken the Stormreaver and the Twilight's Hammer clans with him towards the Orcish fleet still anchored off of the Hillsbrad foothills. On the heels of this discovery, more troubling news had reached Orgrim. The Alliance had learned of King Perinold's treachery and had barricaded the open passes in Alterac Mountains. Calling on reinforcements from the hinterlands was now out of the question. Political, economical, strategic, cultural, morale, it's basically the linchpin of the entirety of the Eastern Kingdoms, alongside Ironforge and Quel'Thalas. If you talk about three specific locations where all power resonates from the Eastern Kingdoms, at least at this point in history, it would be Quel'Thalas, Lordaeron, the capital city, and Ironforge. I'm going here for a specific reason. You'll see in a moment. In that moment, at that time, Doomhammer knew that the war was lost. Even if his forces were able to take the capital, they could not hold it against the full strength of the Alliance. Fury burned through Doomhammer's veins. The Horde had been so close, so very close to victory, and now it faced total annihilation. Orgrim called off the siege and ordered his forces to full retreat to Khaz Modan. Here, I have a view of Dalaran while I wait. He dispatched a Dragonmaw messenger to deliver the same command to soldiers in the hinterlands. If the Horde could regroup, there was a chance to put the pieces of its campaign together. It was a slim hope, but it was the only one Doomhammer had. Nice, love it. The war chief sent the Horde's dragon riders to cover their retreat and waylay the Alliance forces as much as possible. He also sent the Blacktooth Grin clan to hunt down Gul'dan. Orgrim had spared the warlock once before, and he would not make that mistake again. A few days after Doomhammer marched to Lordaeron's capital, Gul'dan gathered his allies and revealed his plans to seek out the tomb of Sargeras. He promised power to all who followed him, more power than they could ever hope to gain by continuing with the Horde and its pointless war. Nearly every member of the Twilight's Hammer and Stormreaver clans pledged their support to the Warlock, although there were a few noticeable holdouts amongst the Horde in Quel'Thalas. One moment. Let's do this really quick. There we go. The Amani trolls had no interest in Gul'dan's call. They continued their siege on the elven capital. The Dragon Maw also defied the Warlock and moved to bar his path. In the end, neither side risked fighting. The threat of mutual annihilation was too great. The Dragon Maw set out to rejoin the main Horde force and warn Orgrim of what had transpired. Gul'dan and his followers headed south. They met occasional resistance from humans along the way, but nothing truly gave them pause. In Hillsbrad foothills, the renegades commandeered a portion of the Horde fleet and set sail. Unbeknownst to Gul'dan, the Blacktooth Grin had already caught up to him. They boarded the rest of the Orcish vessels and followed in his wake. Unbeknownst to Gul'dan, the Blacktooth Grin were not the only threat to Gul'dan. Far from it. Kil'jaeden soon learned of Gul'dan's reckless betrayal, which had come as a surprise. The Warlock had hidden his intentions quite well from the Demon Lord. Well, this will be an interesting circumstance. I'm on a rock. The Warlock had hidden his intentions quite well from the Demon Lord. Kil'jaeden prepared to annihilate his former servant for single-handedly dooming what should have been a monumental Legion victory. Sargeras himself ordered the Demon Lord to stand down. It was not out of mercy, no. Sargeras wanted to punish the Warlock in his own particular way. If it was power Gul'dan wanted, then the Legion's ruler would let him find the tomb of Sargeras. He would let him come within reach of what he desired, let the Orc taste what could have been his, and then Sargeras would rip it all away, just as Gul'dan had done to the Horde's hope of victory. By the way, in case it's not obvious, what you're looking at on the screen is the tomb of Sargeras. Based on the information he had gleaned from the Guardian Medivh's mind, Gul'dan plotted a course to the tomb of Sargeras. The voyage was long and harsh. Colossal waves and fearsome storms lashed at Gul'dan's feet. It was as if nature itself were rising up to thwart the Warlock's quest. As Gul'dan neared the tomb, he could sense the godly energies emanating from within. The promise of so much power, so close at hand, consumed his every thought. The tomb of Sargeras rested at the bottom of the sea, and would require the effort of Gul'dan and his allies to lift it to the surface. The Warlock led a ritual, weaving with his followers' magic into a single immense spell. The skies turned pitch black. In fact, let's give you a nice shot of that there. And the winds lashed the sea into a frenzy. Slowly, ever slowly, the tomb rose from the depths. A rocky island breached the churning ocean. At its center, the colossal tomb of Sargeras, an imposing tower that dominated the barnacle-covered ground. Yeah, by the way, there wasn't some green beam of death coming out at it when this was happening, if that's not obvious. I just thought I'd clarify that, just in case there was any, misconceptions, shall we say. I don't want to be misleading you. I know, right, Permeus? I suppose we'll see, though. There we go. Here's a nice shot of it. Boom, right there. Not long after the tomb of Sargeras had surfaced, the Blacktooth Grin clan approached the island. Gul'dan knew he did not have the numbers to defeat his pursuers. But if he could harness the tomb's power, he could survive. He did not know what, if any, dangers lurked within the tomb, but he had little time to prepare for them. Gul'dan ordered Cho'Gall and the Twilight's Hammer to hold off their enemies while he took the Stormreaver into the structure. As the warlock and his adherents hurried through the tomb's shadowy corridors, they eventually discovered they were not alone. Long ago, when Egwene had transported Sargeras' avatar into the tomb, she'd also imprisoned a number of demon followers at the site. Most of these creatures were dead or barely clinging to life. The Guardian believed that the tomb's enchanted seals would keep them contained, and that was true. The demons would never have been able to escape the structure on their own. Yet over the thousands of years, some of them had fed on the Avatar's power, regaining enough strength to prowl the tombs. At Sargeras' command, the creatures leapt from the shadows to tear Gul'dan's followers apart. Then they turned their wrath on the warlock and flayed him alive, ripping the flesh and muscle from his bones. I do too, Necro. Heck of a mission. It was actually the first mission that really gave me a lot of difficulty in Warcraft 2 as well. At Sargeras, for a brief moment, his screams of agony shook the tomb, and then there was only silence. Only a few of Gul'dan's Storm Reaver adherents survived the encounter with the demons. Before fleeing the tomb, they recovered their master's head, believing it held great power. How different would history be if they had left behind the skull of Gul'dan, I wonder? That one change would affect so many things, wouldn't it? Outside, the Twilight's Hammer fought for their own survival. Led by Dalrend and Main Blackhand, the Blacktooth Grin cut down the betrayers and left their bodies to rot in the tomb's shadow. Cho'Gall suffered grave wounds in the fighting, which you can see on his model to this day. He survived only due to his Twilight Hammer followers. A few members of his clan took the wounded ogre aboard a ship and set sail from the tomb. The winds carried the vessel west into uncharted waters. With vengeance served, the Blacktooth Grin orcs boarded their ships and sailed east. As proof of their victory, they retrieved Gul'dan's skull from one of the warlock's followers. The orc who had sold his race into demonic servitor was no more. There's also a really cool picture here, by the way, of... Wait, actually, you're not going to be able to see it. It's like all green. Oh, no, it's Friday. I'll change for the explanation. By the way, we're going to have another stream pretty soon after this one, so I hope you're looking forward to that. This wasn't here at this point in history. Believe it or not, the depths of Lordaeron's capital city didn't contain some undead necropolis. I know that's strange to think of that, but just bear with me. Just thought I'd share that. Well, in addition to that Necro, they never would have been able to close the Dark Portal. Remember, Khadgar was only able to, at least in the original continuity, I don't know if we're going to find that out in a minute, because this covers the Warcraft 2 expansion in a few pages here. But in the original continuity, Khadgar would never have been able to close the Dark Portal originally if he hadn't had the Skull of Gul'dan. It also impacted Deathwing, too, but we'll get to that later. Far from the tomb of Sargeras, the Horde continued its desperate retreat back to Khaz Modan. The Orcish army in the hinterlands fought through Lothar's forces and raced towards the Thandal Spire. Orgrim and half of his horde followed close behind. Lothar and Turellian rallied, recombining their armies and storming after the retreating horde. With his fleet gone, Orgrim had no choice but to retreat on foot. Long weeks of hard marching and sporadic battles with the Alliance had taken their toll on the Orcish armies. Before long, Orgrim and the remnants of the Horde limped into Khaz Modan, which we're not quite there yet, pushing through the wetlands and into the even colder mountainous parts of the region. Now, I want to remind you again for a moment here that the reason that the Horde lost here makes a lot of sense and is in fact very awesome, because they lost and then they lost and then they lost, and it's just like this massive army of doom was slowly weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened, and now they're retreating and being weakened even still, which again I like better than the original version of, oh, by the way, it's suddenly they start losing. You know, this makes a lot more sense to me. I just wanted to praise that again. Sorry. Moving on. Hey, look! It's South Shore. I can't be happy about that. I may be a Horde supporter overall, but this was... what the hell? What was this crap? Anyways, sorry, moving on. En route to the Dwarven homeland, Orgrim had dispatched dragon riders to look for the Blacktooth Grin and learn what had become of them. Some of these scouts returned with news. They had spotted Blacktooth Grin sailing back towards Modan. The orc sailors had told the dragon riders of Gul'dan's demise. Orgrim took pleasure in this development. If nothing else, at least the traitorous warlock would never again manipulate the orcish race. Sorry. Orgrim only wished he'd been the one to deliver the killing blow. Yet the satisfaction of Gul'dan's death faded as Orgrim took stock of his forces. The war had annihilated over half of his armies. With Blacktooth Grin still at sea, he had no navy. The Horde could not find victory in its current state. It wouldn't even be able to hold Khaz Modan, especially if the dwarves and the gnomes joined the fight. By the way, Blood Elves, Demon Hunters are awesome. Like, really, really fun to play. Also, Night Elves are better than Blood Elves, as we all know. Orgrim dispatched a messenger to gather reinforcements from Draenor. Whether or not the bloodthirsty clans were ready to fight no longer mattered. He needed them now. Then he ordered his soldiers to gather in Blackrock Spire, which we're going to start heading towards now. Blackrock Spire was deep in Horde-controlled territory. If the Alliance chose to pursue, Doomhammer would make them pay for every step. He told Chieftain Kilrog and his Bleeding Hollow to remain in Khaz Modan. Throughout the Second War, they had kept the dwarves and the gnomes confined in their fortress cities. The depths of their fortress cities. Now they would have an even greater role. They would delay the Alliance army and prevent it from smashing into the Horde's rearguard. Doomhammer gathered Chieftain Zulahead and as many able-bodied warriors from the Dragon Maw as they could. The Dragon Riders were still scattered across Lordaeron, but Orgrim knew they were simply too valuable a weapon to simply abandon. He ordered Necros to rally the remains of the beast at Grim Batol and then transport them, and Alexstrasza, and the rest of his resources all to Blackrock Spire. Orgrim also commanded the orcs to send some of the Dragon Riders to seek out the Blacktooth Grin, inform them of the Horde's new rendezvous, and guard their ships from any Alliance naval forces. Okay, a lot of them. Lothar knew the Horde was wounded. One swift, merciless strike would be all it would take to shatter the Orcish army forever, until Warcraft 3, of course. Though the Alliance soldiers were fatigued from months of battle, Lothar pushed them onward. This was their chance to end the war. The Alliance's swift march south would not have been possible without Turelion and the other paladins. The Holy Warriors worked day and night, mending the wounded, filling their hearts with resolve and courage. The Alliance soldiers poured into Khaz Modan and made short work of the Bleeding Hollow. The paladin led the hunting parties to root out the orcs and drive them from the region. In defeating the Bleeding Hollow, the Alliance also liberated Ironforge and Gnomeregan. The Bronzebeard dwarves and the gnomes emerged from their mountain, jubilant and eager for retribution. Both people pledged their forces to the Alliance. They would lend their hammers, their axes, and most importantly, their technology to the war effort. For the first time in the war, every noble race in the Eastern Kingdom was united, except for those filthy trolls. Nobody likes them. Wait, Magister is Garrosh? It makes so much sense now. Northwest of Khaz Modan, in an area I'm going to try and show you here, the Blacktooth Grin continued their sea voyage. Dragon Riders, sent by Necros, had found the vessels and delivered word of the Horde's retreat to Blackrock Spire. Dalrend and Maim ordered the Blacktooth Grin to alter course to sail to Stormwind, which was still under Horde control. From there, the orcs would travel to Blackrock Spire by land. Yet if Dalrand and Maim were hoping for an easy passage south, they would not find it. Oh, come on, is it still cold? Admiral Proudmoore was patrolling the waters, near the island of Crestfall, which should be... Let me think about this for a moment. Right there. Should be about there-ish. I should be basically staring at it. So let me go ahead and just give you a shot here. I know, it's just ocean. There's an island there, I swear. Near the island of Crestfall, the Alliance Navy overtook the Horde fleet. Just as in the battle near Zuldair, Proudmoore outmaneuvered his foes and hammered them with cannon fire. And, just as before, the Horde had dragons. The beast swooped down from the skies and engulfed the Alliance ships in sheets of fire. But this time Proudmoore did not retreat. If you think that's true in Warcraft, Lava, you know very little about Warcraft. Just saying. After being defeated by the dragons in Quel'Thalas, the dwarves had learned new tactics. They used Griffin's mobility and speed to their advantage, outmaneuvering their larger foes and drawing their attention away from the Alliance boats. Lightning-infused storm hammers and dragon flame lit the ships alight, while cannon fire painted the waves red. Dalrend and Maim's ship and a few other vessels escaped the battle intact, but most of the Horde's fleet was sunk by Proudmoore's superior forces. The dragon riders scattered in all directions, fleeing before the wrath of the fearless Griffin riders. The Alliance had won a decisive victory, destroying the Horde's navy, but at great cost. The Red Dragons had decimated Proudmoore's own ships. Many brave sailors had died, including Admiral Proudmoore's son. Proudmoore would never forgive his child's death, and his hatred of the orcs would fester like an open wound until the end of his days. For those of you not aware, there's been a lot of theories that Jaina Proudmoore, Admiral Proudmoore's daughter, for those of you not aware, had retreated to Quel'Thalas and had been reconnecting with her brother, the Admiral's son, who had basically been missing from the lore for quite some time. I think this definitively says that he's frickin' dead. I was making a jest, Lava. I'm sorry. Let me put it to you this way, Lava. I agree with you in general, and yeah, it's totally Tolkien's thing. People who call Warcraft orcs evil are wrong, to put it as bluntly as I can. I'm not calling you out for that. What I'm trying to say is that that's like saying humans are evil. That's like saying any race that happens to include evil people are evil. So the orcs have plenty of horrible people in them, but they also have plenty of awesome people in them, too. It's actually probably one of the reasons why Warcraft orcs are one of my favorite actual presentations of orcs across fiction. Because they're just a race of people with their own culture and with their own perspectives. They're not roar, and they're not you know, they're their own thing. Although I do like Warhammer 40k orcs, of course, but that's different. Meanwhile, I like how you can see my frickin' breath there. And by I like, I mean I hate. That is a fantastic question, Necro. Because we've all been assuming for a long time that Jaina's brother has been the one running Quel'Thalas this whole time. And for those of you not aware, Quel'Thalas has been 100% absent, except for, I shouldn't say 100, like 99.9 infinity absent from World of Warcraft, and it's been an aggravation to many players, myself included. Quel'Thalas was one of my favorite sides to play as back in Warcraft 2, just because I loved the idea of a navy nation. You know, it was interesting, it was cool. We see a bare little hints of them, and a few forces that claim to be remnants of them, most notably in Theramore and the related regions, but that's it. Quel'Thalas there isn't even on the frickin' map. Here, I'll show you, right here, look at this. Quel'Thalas should be, actually I'm not 100% sure, but it should be basically right around here somewhere. And it's freaking not. As you can see, there's nothing there. So, yeah, who the hell has been running Quel'Thalas for the last 30 years at this point? No, I think it hasn't been that long. I think it's more like 15 years or something like that. Anywho, moving on. There's Blackrock Spire. A quick side story. I'm sure Magister will enjoy this one. While the Alliance was besieging Blackrock Spire, King Anasterion led efforts to drive the Amani trolls from Quel'Thalas. The battles were costly, but the elves managed to secure their homeland. In the years to come, Anasterion would withdraw from the Alliance, accusing it of abandoning the High Elves in their most desperate hour, which is actually kind of the opposite of what happened, but High Elves are going to High Elf, right? Not all of the High Elves believed that, but enough of them did. Yeah, fair enough, Dakota. MMO time might be responsible for at least part of what's going on here. Now, Fallout asks a very pertinent question. The Cataclysm pretty much messed up half the planet. I mean, actually, you see this giant chasm here? This used to be a mountain range. This is just one of the impacts of the Cataclysm, so I wonder how island nations fared. I really do. It is actually possible that they might have actually said, yeah, Quel'Thalas is frickin' gone. Because, to be 100% blunt, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the Goblin island, whose name I can't think of, is frickin' gone at this point. So here we are, Blackrock Spire. From Blackrock Spire, Doomhammer watched the Alliance army wind into the burning steppes like a serpent of silver and gold. Actually, that would have been from this direction, actually. Thousands of Alliance soldiers arranged themselves around the Horde stronghold and began their relentless siege. The fortress's gates would hold, but not for long. Dragon riders from Grim Batol had yet to arrive, and neither had Blacktooth Grin or the reinforcements from Draenor. Neither would ever get there in time. Just as an aside, by the way, I actually don't know Necro, and that is a good question. I was thinking about that myself, actually. Although, we do know that some of the elves disagree, because remember, quite a few of the elves assisted Jaina and Arthas during the beginnings of Warcraft 3, and several of them agreed with her and journeyed west with her into Kalimdor. So, I would think that's more along the lines of there was just a sufficient group of people who didn't agree. Keeping also in mind that Anasterion frickin' died during Warcraft 3, during the Scourge invasion specifically. So, maybe Quel'Thalas just felt differently, and since he was now the ruling prince, shrug. So, there's this. I just wanted to show you this to really get across how incredibly defensible this area is. That's the entrance. That's the only entrance. This is the path up to it. There's the fortress. There's the entrance. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, hang on. That just looks like a mountain, not a fortress. Well, for the benefit of those of you who have never been inside this mountain, let's just say it's a little more fortressy on the inside. And a little more built in. And also freaking awesome. This is probably one of my favorite architectural areas of vanilla WoW. Because this was like this even back in vanilla. Despair took root in Doomhammer's heart, but he crushed it down the moment it reared its head. He would not give in, not now, and not ever. This war was not about glory. This war was not about him. It was about restoring honor to his race and ensuring his race's survival. Doomhammer had two choices, the same two he'd always had: secure a home in Azeroth or return to Draenor and die. If death was his fate, he would at least die in honorable combat. Yes, this is the other entrance, by the way, which will be relevant in a bit. We'll get there. We'll get there. It was in the fortress of Blackrock Spire. He stoked the fires of the Horde's bloodlust, called upon his forces for one last charge, one final battle to decide their destiny. They were the unstoppable Horde! They had conquered the Draenei, Stormwind, and many others. This world called Azeroth was theirs for the taking. The Alliance would not stand in their way. As Alliance siege engine hammered at the mountain, the metal gates suddenly yawned wide, along with a mammoth for some friggin' reason. Thousands of howling soldiers spilled from the stronghold. Orgrim himself led the Horde's assault. He was under no illusions that he could defeat the Alliance by force. Instead, he cut a path straight to Lothar. Doomhammer had learned much of human culture in the recent years. Much like the orcs, the humans revered and idolized their leaders. Killing a chieftain would often break the resolve of an entire orc clan. Doomhammer hoped that striking down Lothar would have the same impact on the Alliance. The Horde's suicidal charge caught the Alliance off guard, and Doomhammer stormed through the siege lines and launched himself at Lothar. The Supreme Commander did not flee. He met Doomhammer in single combat, just as any honorable warrior would. A hush fell over the Horde and Alliance soldiers near the burning steppes. Neither warrior gave ground, not at first, but Orgrim was simply stronger than his opponent. The war chief shattered Lothar's greatsword with a swing of his warhammer, and the Alliance commander fell to his knees. With his next merciless blow, Doomhammer crushed Lothar's skull. And to this day, I hope you're getting a good shot of this. Yeah, you are. To this day, this monument stands in the exact spot where Orgrim and Lothar fought facing up into the shadows of Blackrock Spire. Point in fact, even the orcs who inhabit this area, and you can see a few of them roaming around right now, in vanilla, have sat here and left this monument untouched, because even the orcs respected Lothar. Everyone respected Lothar, because he was awesome. He was a good leader, he was a good soldier, and he was played by a terrible actor in the movie, which is part of why that pisses me off so much, because Lothar was basically the proto-Arthas, if you will. He was a very respected, honorable, fantastic, amazing man who pretty much is, I'd say, 1/3 of the reason why the Alliance won the Second War. The second third would be the Paladins, and the third would be Gul'dan, if anybody's curious. Watching the war chief vanquish the enemy commander inspired the orcs, and they pressed the attack. Orgrim's gambit had paid off. He could see sorrow, despair in his enemy's eyes. The Alliance soldiers were flagging. Many of them were losing their will to fight. But Turellian did not give in to sorrow or despair. Such feelings were of no use to him. They would not bring Lothar back, and they would not avenge his fallen friend. The young paladin unleashed holy power. The light radiated from Turellian, blinding all around him, including Orgrim, and bringing the fighting to a standstill. The paladin took up Lothar's broken blade and knocked the stunned orc warchief unconscious. Then he called on the allies to stand tall in this dark hour, just as Lothar would have. Through every trial the Alliance had faced, their commander had never hesitated. He had led them with wisdom and with bravery. He had treated them as more than soldiers. He had treated them as friends and family. They were all Lothar's sons and daughters, and they would carry on his dream of ridding the world of the Horde. Now was not the time for uncertainty, not when victory was in reach. Now was the time to fight, for Azeroth, for the Alliance, and for Lothar. Hope burned bright in every Alliance soldier who heard Turellian that day. With a final battle cry, the Paladin rallied his comrades. The Alliance crashed into the Horde, and the Orcish armies buckled from the onslaught. Some fled, north, east, west. Others raced towards the Dark Portal. A brave few continued fighting inside the Blackrock Spire, hoping for a death in battle, but they would not find it. Turellian and the other Paladins overwhelmed them, but did not put them to the blade. They bound them, along with the war chief, in chains. By the way, I love the fact that he's actually pointing up at Blackrock Spire. That's just a nice touch there. Led by Terran Gorefiend and his Death Knights, some of the Horde escaped the Alliance and fled east towards the Dark Portal. Reaching the safety of their homeworld was their only possible hope of survival. Turellian and the Alliance hounded their every step, memories of Lothar's death still raw and painful. They were eager for vengeance, but just as eager to track the Horde to the Dark Portal. Little was known of the exact gateway or its location, and Turellian hoped the retreating Orcs and Death Knights would lead him to it, which they did. Actually, that is mentioned in this book, Little Billy. I read ahead a little bit earlier, just to prep myself for where I wanted to be in the game. Turellian didn't... rewind. Outside the Dark Portal, in the Black Morass, the Alliance finally overtook the Horde. The battle that unfolded was the most desperate fought in the Second War. Gorefiend and his Death Knights called upon the fury and terror of the necromantic arts. They could not defeat Turellian's forces, but it was enough to allow the Horde to slip back through the portal. Turellian did not pursue the Horde. He had already pushed his soldiers to the breaking point. He did not know what awaited for them on the other side. There was only one thing left to do, to destroy the Dark Portal, and in so doing, ensure that the Horde would never return. I know, right, fellow? For this, Turellian called on Khadgar and his fellow Magi. The sorcerers gathered around the looming gateway and began a great spell. Khadgar led the other mages as they unraveled the portal, pulling apart every ethereal thread until the rift slammed shut. The backlash of energies shattered the portal's stone frame in a blinding explosion of arcane light. And in case you're ever wondering why there's a crater where the Dark Portal is, which you can see now in the distance on your screen, that's why. Because the original Dark Portal, which is not the one you're looking at, was actually catastrophically destroyed by Khadgar. The dark portal which had brought so much ruin to Azeroth crumbled into dust. A roar of approval sounded from the Alliance lines. The soldiers who had fought so hard, who had seen their friends and loved ones die, fell to their knees in celebration. Many wept tears of joy. The war was over. The Alliance had won. 7 years after the Dark Portal. The Horde had lost. Such was the news that Terran Gorefiend and his followers carried back to Draenor. What was worse, the way to Azeroth was now closed. When Khadgar had destroyed Azeroth's side of the Dark Portal, the resultant blast of arcane energy had lashed into the Orcish homeworld, and the gateway on Draenor had exploded in a flash of errant magic. The portal's physical frame shattered into rubble. There was now no escape from the Horde's dying world. After so much bloodshed and war, the Orcs had accomplished nothing. They had precious little food, and no enemy to conquer. There was no future for the Orcs except to die a slow and agonizing death. Some powerful clans remained on Draenor. As was the case before the First War, bloodlust consumed them. Over time, the Orcs' numbers had dwindled, but they were still slaves to anger. Word of the Horde's defeat on Azeroth fueled their rage. It was only a matter of time before the Horde would consume itself from within. The remnants of the Horde on Azeroth were faring little better. Kilrogg and his Bleeding Hollow had not reached Blackrock Spire in time to join Doomhammer. They witnessed the aftermath as some of the defeated Horde soldiers stumbled into the Dark Portal. Kilrogg had hoped to reach the gateway as well, but the Alliance army barred his way. Rather than risk a suicidal charge to the portal, he'd pulled back to his Bleeding Hollow. The Orcs quietly disappeared into the wilds north of the gateway and planned their next move. Much like the Bleeding Hollow, the Dragon Maw at Grim Batol had not arrived at Blackrock Spire in time to aid Doomhammer. Seeing the Alliance triumphant, the Orcs had retreated to their fortress. They barricaded themselves within the ancient stronghold and continued breeding and training their red dragons. If the Alliance ever discovered their presence, at least the Dragon Maw would have weapons to fight with. Dalrund, Maim, and the surviving members of the Blacktooth Grin clan were also still alive. And by the way, by all accounts, that's who you play as in Warcraft 2 if you're playing the Orcs, is the Blacktooth Grin clan. Just a bit of reference there. The clan had gathered with the other Horde survivors, mainly from the Blackrock clan, and waited until the Alliance had pulled its forces out of the region. With the way clear, they snuck back into Blackrock Spire and took control of the stronghold. Dalrund and Maim blamed the Horde's defeat on Doomhammer. They despised the war chief, especially ever since he'd struck down their father in Mak'gora. The brothers now planned to reforge the Horde as they saw fit, but they knew it would take time. They gradually reached out to other groups of Horde survivors, trying to rally them under their new banner. Kilrogg ignored them. He had seen his destiny. It did not lie with Dalrund and Maim's false Horde. But the Dragon Maw did pledge their support to the Orcs in Blackrock Spire. They offered to give some of their enslaved dragons to their forces if needed. Other members of the Horde scattered in... Oh, actually, I'm going to pause here for a moment. Sort of, Magister. Almost most of the Orcs in Blackrock Spire back during the Ubris and Lobris quests, which are still timeline-wise stuck in vanilla at this point, were Blacktooth Grin. Now, as a quick aside, the term they call themselves is the True Horde. That's what the Blackhand Sons called themselves. Funnily enough, Garrosh also called his Horde the True Horde. For the sake of distinction, most people refer to the Horde that was formed in Blackrock Spire as the Dark Horde, and Garrosh's Horde as the Disgusting Horde. Granted, I penned that term, but I think it fits. Moving on. Other members of the Horde scattered into the wilderness. Some traveled in packs, some alone. Amongst the solitary survivors was Eitrigg, former handler of Garona. In the aftermath of defeat, he dwelled on everything the half-orc had told him about the dark forces manipulating the Orcs. He began to believe what Garona said, and his unquestioning loyalty to the Horde faded. Gul'dan's promises, the benefactor Kil'jaeden, the Dark Portal, none of these things had been what they seemed. Forming the Horde had not brought the Orcs salvation, it had brought them doom. With shame and anger in his heart, Eitrigg disavowed the Horde, struck out north in search of a place to rest and spend the rest of his days so that he might die in peace. I know, right, Necro? Side story. During the Second War, many members of the Alliance formed friendships. Some, like Illyria and Turelion, even kindled a closer relationship. There was a lot of flirting, and the elf and the human were from different worlds, but they had been brought together in a way that only war could do. As the months passed and Illyria and Turelion discovered more about each other, they grew close. The war and its aftermath would test their bonds, but in the end their love would prevail, and they would actually have a son, too. I don't think that's mentioned here, though. Give me just a second. Yeah, we'll stay here for the moment. Sure, a little bit. If you need stuff, I don't know. I mean, I have something else planned. While the remnants of the Horde struggled for survival, victory celebration graced every Alliance city. Humans, dwarves, gnomes, and high elves reveled in their triumph. Yet when the jubilation passed, a harsh reality set in. Life would never be the same. War had decimated the Eastern Kingdoms. The Horde had razed countless villages and cities. Corpses choked roadways and mountain passes from Hillsbrad to Quel'Thalas. For nearly everyone who'd fought, the war did not end with the Dark Portal's destruction. Survivors were plagued by nightmares of the horrors they've witnessed. Many soldiers had lost close friends. Some had lost entire families. Still others emerged from the war forever maimed and disabled. The struggle to find inner peace would be a long and arduous road, a battle more difficult than any of the survivors had faced against the Horde, and is also probably, I'd say, the second contributing factor to why the Cult of the Damned and the Twilight's Hammer started to gain predominance in the following years. Even Turelion was haunted by what he'd seen. The death of his mentor, Lothar, pressed down like an iron fist on his heart. The temptation to withdraw into himself was strong, but Turelion would not abandon his people in need. He had been promoted to Supreme Commander of the Alliance, and thousands now looked to him for guidance and leadership. Turelion knew the key to bringing back life to normal was rebuilding the Eastern Kingdoms. He spearheaded these efforts by gathering the Alliance leadership in Lordaeron. The rulers agreed to pool their resources to mend their war-ravaged nations. Due to its betrayal, for some reason, Alterac did not take part in this meeting. Now, I'm going to address a question this book doesn't answer. You might be thinking, well, what happened to Alterac? Well, I'll give you him. Alterac doesn't exist anymore at all, unless you count a few roaming bandits who claim to be of Paranol's line to be Alterac, which, believe it or not, I don't really think qualifies as a kingdom. Yeah, Alterac, as much as I think it's interesting that Alterac was the only one who was capable of thinking of bartering or bargaining with the Horde, I also got to say that his betrayal was incredibly self-serving and frankly evil. And Alterac kind of got what it deserved. Moving on. The human leaders were still debating how to deal with the Rogue Kingdom, and the discussion would continue for many weeks. Special importance was placed on rebuilding Stormwind. King Terenas of Lordaeron had pledged to aid the fallen kingdom and support Prince Varian Rin's ascension to the throne. For some, Stormwind was a powerful symbol of humanity's future. If even it could rise from the ashes, anyone could. Word of Stormwind's reconstruction was met with mixed feelings by the refugees. Many of them refused to return to their broken home. Stormwind was a reminder of everything they'd lost. These refugees preferred to start their lives new in Lordaeron, but many others did return to Stormwind, including Prince Varian Rin. Turelion oversaw efforts to repatriate the kingdom's citizens and secure Varian's place as the next king. He surrounded the teenager with seasoned ministers and advisors to help him settle into his new role. While Turelion was occupied in Stormwind, his fellow paladins went to work in Lordaeron. The Order of the Silver Hand had been formed to fight the Horde, but its purpose did not end with the Dark Portal's destruction. The Paladins coordinated with the Church of the Holy Light to help the Alliance move forward, healing the sick, granting shelter to survivors who are so broken by the war they can no longer care for themselves. I hope you're paying attention to the common theme here, which is a lot of money being spent to recover from the war. That'll be important. Probably not in this book, but definitely after it. Speaking of a lot of money spent, not all the members of the Alliance were so focused on healing and rebuilding. Hatred of the Orcs still burned in the hearts of many. Illyria Windrunner had seen countless elves perish in the Second War. Driven by revenge, she spent her days hunting down orcs who had escaped capture, her personal method of dealing with loss and sorrow brought on by the war. Illyria was not the only one hunting orcs. Groups of humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes stalked the eastern kingdoms, combed the deep wilds and remote mountains in search of their prey. The Alliance hunters captured many of the orcs they found. Others they killed on sight, vengeance for loved ones who had died in the war. I know, right, Necro? Actually, Takoida, I have a strong feeling that's exactly what happened. If you pay attention to the history of Warcraft, the goblins didn't become a major player until about the era of Warcraft 3. In other words, after Warcraft 2, when they suddenly got a gigantic influx of basically stolen Stormwind gold. That could be coincidental, but it does line up pretty well, doesn't it? The question of what to do with the captured orcs became a subject of bitter debate. Gilneas and Stromgarde argued for the execution of the prisoners, yet Lordaeron was against putting the orcs to the blade. The capacity for mercy showed the Alliance was more civilized and honorable than the Horde. Rather than execute the orcs, they wanted to lock them in internment camps, prisons to be funded by Alliance membership. More money spent. Dalaran's Kirin Tor also lobbied for imprisonment, although for different reasons. After the First War, the Council of Tirisfal had faded from existence. The Kirin Tor now took charge over matters that the Secret Order had once specialized in, such as investigating demonic activity. Dalaran's Magi wished to study the orcs and their strange magics, in as much for the pursuit of knowledge as for strategic purposes. The Kirin Tor argued they could better understand the orcs' strengths and weaknesses, and they could defeat them if war ever broke out again. The Alliance eventually came to an agreement. The member nations would fund the construction of camps which would house the orcs. One of Stromgarde's most celebrated soldiers, Danath Trollbane, would oversee these crude prisons. If order could be maintained, the camps would remain. If not, the Alliance would revisit the possibility of executing the orcs. The camps did prove successful, but bitterness remained over their existence. Gilneas thought the prisons were a pointless burden on the Alliance. They were already spending a fortune rebuilding Stormwind, and more coin was being siphoned into keeping their enemies alive. In the years that followed, the cost of maintaining the camps would remain a sticking point for Gilneas and eventually drive the nation away from the Alliance. Some people think that's merciful, Magister. I don't agree, by the way. Yes, it specifically said Steamweedle, Necro. And, but again, it's more, the mages wanted to study them, so there is actually a real benefit to leaving the orcs alive. Side story. Though Danath Trollbane, I never had to know how to pronounce his frickin' name, oversaw all the camps, he delegated command of them to the Second War's highest-ranked veterans. One prison, just outside Durnhold Keep, in Hillsbrad Foothills, fell under the control of a respected lord named Attalus Blackmore. During the First War, Blackmore had discovered the infant orc Goel and had taken him to Durnhold. Unbeknownst to the rest of the Alliance, he'd continued raising the unorc, who he named Thrall. In secret, Blackmore plotted to mold Thrall into his own obedient general, a general he would one day lead the captive orcs against the Alliance. It was Blackmore's hope that he could assert dominion over the human nations and reign as their new king. Yeah, I hate Blackmore. Far to the south, Khadgar watched over the site where the Dark Portal had once stood. Right here, actually. I've just realized I'm an idiot. His heroics in the Second War had earned him the coveted title of Archmage. Yet Khadgar had spent no time in celebrating. He knew the threat posed by the Horde was not at all over. The fell energies used by the Horde had killed much of the land surrounding the Dark Portal. You know, actually, Takoida, he might literally have been. Where is she? There she is. Hey, what's up, Zidormi? Listen, could you take me to the past really quick? Thank you. That's literally what she's doing. I am now in the past. That's not a joke. Bronze dragons, yo. There we go. There's Netherguard Keep. Back before it was destroyed. So, yeah, as I think I've mentioned, this all used to be swamp. I'm about to discuss what happened here. Even though the gateway had been destroyed, fell magic was somehow seeping into Azeroth. Khadgar eventually discovered this was because a connection still existed between this world and Draenor. A lingering dimensional rift, which is actually there to this day, by the way, remained in the area. From it, fell energies from the Orcish homeworld were affecting Azeroth. The rift resisted Khadgar's attempts to close it. Unless Khadgar and the other Magi held the fell magic at bay, it would creep across the eastern kingdoms and bleed the land of life. Khadgar and his fellow Magi brought their findings to the Alliance. The Archmage warned them as long as the dimensional rift was open, the possibility of another invasion remained. He called on the Alliance nations to fund a stronghold, Netherguard Keep, to watch over the rift. From there, Khadgar and the other Magi would also neutralize the spreading fell magic. After considerable debate, Khadgar secured the resources he needed. Netherguard gradually arose atop a croppy outlooking in the southern half of Black Morass. From the construction site, Khadgar observed the broken landscape and measured its fell energies. He often mused about the Orcish homeworld. What horrors lingered there? What had become of the orcs who had returned through the portal? Soon enough, he would find out. Yeah, you can do it in Duskwallow as well. It's one of the other major areas that was changed semi-recently. And here you can see the Dark Portal back before it was turned into the Draenor Dark Portal. Whatever. You know, it's dumb. Let's just move on. Ugh. Yeah, so let's kind of just take a shot over here. 8 years after the Dark Portal, we have a expansion to Warcraft 2 called Beyond the Dark Portal, which is, in my personal experience, hellaciously more difficult than Warcraft 2 proper. Like, the first mission of Beyond the Dark Portal was harder than the last mission of Warcraft 2 proper, in my opinion. And it made it going back all of a sudden, like, okay, let's relearn this game. Oh, God! It was pretty rough. I also, for those of you not aware, obviously the reason I had to go to the past is because Netherguard Keep is destroyed in the present. And that made me sad, because I remember helping to build and defend that place back in Warcraft 2. Am I the only one who remembers that? I also remember invading it, actually, as the orcs. Life after the Second War was stark for Draenor's orcs. The world was still dying. Fell energies continued to spread, choking natural life into extinction. The demonic bloodlust coursing through their veins had not diminished, and too often orcs turned upon orcs, creating a whirlpool of chaos that threatened to drag the race down into oblivion. The Warsong and Shattered Hands in particular had insatiable need for violence. The closest the Horde came to a leader was Ner'zhul, the orc who had inadvertently led his people into the Burning Legion's clutches. Gul'dan had seen no use in bringing the Elder Shaman to Azeroth, and he had left him back on Draenor. Ner'zhul had kept to his ancestral lands in Shadowmoon Valley. In time, Draenor's orcs looked to him for guidance, but leadership was not a burden he wanted. Ner'zhul had fallen into despair. Day and night, visions of death plagued his broken mind. He saw orc skeletons littering a barren world. He'd even had its skull tattooed on his face, a practice shamans had long used to mark certain failed apprentices as dead to their people. For Ner'zhul, there seemed to be no way to save the Horde from doom. The invasion of Azeroth had been a desperate attempt to escape a slow death, and it had failed. The orcs did not have the strength to try again. Oh my god, I just realized that Draenor, at this point in history, is the world of Dark Souls. Like, at any point, really. Teron Gorefiend, however, was not about to give up. He had seen Gul'dan's plans unravel, but he also witnessed moments of incredible power. Conquering Azeroth? Perhaps it was impossible. Yet Gul'dan had gleaned knowledge from Medivh's mind, and he had told his Death Knights that there were many potent artifacts out there that were vulnerable, ripe for the taking. Gorefiend had 3 particular artifacts in mind. The first... Yeah, I know, Badger, isn't that cool? The first was the Book of Medivh, a tome that contained some of the Guardian's considerable power and his knowledge of blending different shades of magic together. Something that Quel'Thalas would later use, actually. The second was the Eye of Dalaran, a relic crafted by the Kirin Tor that could focus and amplify magical energies. The third was the Scepter of Sargeras. This artifact, created long ago by the Burning Legion, held the ability to open gateways between worlds. Gorefiend and his Death Knights cared only for themselves. They desired a world they could assert sole dominion over, but they knew they would need the Horde's help to escape Draenor. With the artifacts, the Orcs could create new dimensional rifts, not to Azeroth, but to other worlds where the Horde could settle. Yet these artifacts were back on Azeroth, and Gul'dan had not told his knights of their exact locations. Even if Gorefiend could rebuild the Dark Portal, he would need the Horde's help to claim these instruments of power. This presented a challenge. None of the survivors trusted Gul'dan's former allies, especially the unholy Death Knights. Success depended on Ner'zhul. He was the only orc on all of Draenor who still had the influence to rally and lead the clans. We'll see, Necro, because I'm very curious what they're going to do with Ner'zhul in the next couple of sections here. So, note that he hasn't actually taken up the skull yet. We'll see if anything comes of that. Moving on. Ner'zhul vehemently resisted Gorefiend's ideas. What good would a few relics of power do? How could they possibly save the orcs? More importantly, Gorefiend had betrayed Ner'zhul in years past. He had been one of Gul'dan's closest allies. How could Ner'zhul trust the Death Knight? Gorefiend persisted, telling Ner'zhul of how they could open new rifts to flee from their dying homeland. There were countless worlds out in the cosmos. Even a weakened horde could surely find one to conquer. No, Fallout. That's all I'm going to say about that. They flat out removed Medivh and Garona's relationship. There's really only one reason to do that. Ner'zhul slowly relented. Gorefiend's plan was appealing. Draenor's decay weighed heavily upon Ner'zhul. He felt guilt for allowing the Legion to sink its claws into his people, and a fresh start on a fresh world might be his only chance to redeem himself. I'm going to pause right now, because all of this characterization for Ner'zhul lines up with my own headcanon for Ner'zhul, and one of the reasons why I always kind of didn't think that it was Ner'zhul, or at least not really Ner'zhul, who was the one who was the first Lich King. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, we don't know the answer to that in this book, but considering the third Chronicle will definitively cover the Lich King and the events of Warcraft 3, I think we'll know finally definitively what the hell was going on with the first Lich King in about a frickin' year. Moving on. He gathered the leaders of the remaining clans. Among them were Grommash Hellscream of the War Songs, Kargath Bladefist of the Shattered Hand, and Fenris of the Thunderlords. Ner'zhul was stunned at how easily they agreed to his plans. Hellscream, Bladefist, and Fenris had been forced to sit out the entirety of the First and Second Wars. They thirsted for battle. Any battle! The other clans wanted war too. Any chance to escape Draenor was worth taking. Opening the Dark Portal for the first time had required tremendous amounts of magical energy. Restoring the rift to its former size would be far simpler. The bridge still existed, albeit in diminished form. Teron Gorefiend told Ner'zhul that the lingering power kept in the skull of Gul'dan would be more than enough to reconstruct the Dark Portal. That was a fortunate bit of news, for the skull had been brought back to Draenor by the Horde refugees. In the time since the Dark Portal had slammed shut, the skull had passed between orcs, traded and fought over as a prized trinket. After claiming the skull, Ner'zhul and the Death Knights began their great convocation. He could only hope the alliance would be unprepared. Insert Illidan joke here. I hope so. I hope not, Dakota. True, Necro. He might just be going, woohoo. I would still rather he not be himself, because that just makes too much sense for me. We already know that a person can be themselves and not themselves with all their original memory as two completely distinct entities. We see this in the Death Knights, just to use an immediate example. And that's recent lore, not retconned lore, so... In the waning months of the Second War, Garona had wandered the land on her own. She could still feel the Shadow Council's dark presence in her mind, trying to bend her thoughts. She could not trust her actions around friend or foe. Slowly and patiently, she fought her way back into control, shrugging away as many of Gul'dan's lingering mental chains as she could. Finally, she was confident she could resist the Shadow Council's orders. That meant she was going to visit the one person she still trusted in the world, Khadgar. Under the cover of darkness, she infiltrated Netherguard Keep and snuck into Khadgar's private quarters as he slept. They had not seen each other since the battle against Medivh. That was back in the First War, if you're not remembering. They had much to discuss. Garona told him of her activities during the Second War, and she openly confessed to assassinating King Lane. Khadgar believed her when she said that she had been compelled to do it by Gul'dan. He could sense the Shadow Council's mangled spellwork still woven through her thoughts. The presence of these dark enchantments proved something else. At least one member of the Shadow Council was still alive and on Azeroth. Were that not the case, the spells would have lost their potency the moment Gul'dan died. Someone was trying to maintain his links to his old puppets. Over several months, Khadgar secretly met with Garona outside Netherguard Keep, carefully unraveling the Shadow Council's hold on her. And he was successful. Garona, for the first time in her life, was free. In gratitude, Garona offered to do whatever she could to hunt down the Shadow Council on Azeroth. Khadgar eagerly accepted. Of late, he had sensed strange energies radiating from the nearby rift, and he was concerned that forces on Draenor were working to expand it. He asked Garona to remain in the area, hidden from the Alliance while he investigated. Think of it more of a brute force thing, Tekoida. Plunk! Serve me. Before long... hello, Love Eva. Before long, Khadgar sent a message to many of the Alliance's leaders, asking them to meet in Netherguard Keep at once. There was some reluctance. The Second War had only recently ended, and most nations were still working to rebuild. Remember, it's been about a year. Nonetheless, the leaders traveled to the Keep. Once there, they understood Khadgar's urgency. He and the other Magi had managed to stop the spreading fell energies, but not before they had turned the south half of Black Morass into a wasteland. The Keep's garrison had taken to calling the region the Blasted Lands. The northern portion of the Black Morass, still teeming with life, had been renamed the Swamp of Sorrows, in honor of those who had died in the Second War. The sight of the Blasted Lands was a sobering reminder of the dark forces the Alliance had stopped, and of what they might be called upon to stop again. But the state of the land wasn't the truly bad news. Khadgar told the leaders there had been unmistakable surges of fell energy where the Dark Portal had once stood. He feared that the orcs were attempting to expand the existing rift and pass through it. The gathered leaders agreed to give Khadgar their full support. War-weary as they were, they had no intention of allowing the Horde to gain another foothold on this world. Turellian coordinated the military effort from Stormwind, where he was in the midst of helping the kingdom rebuild. He asked Danath, I never know how to say his freaking name, Trollbane, one of the Second War's most prominent veterans, with leading a small army to the Blasted Lands. In the meantime, Turellian would rally the rest of the Alliance forces for the march south. Unfortunately, the Horde's invasion was already underway. I can get a better shot of this. There we go. Let's go this way. Just a few weeks after Khadgar warned the Alliance of the impending threat, Ner'zhul finally succeeded. Drawing on the Skull of Gul'dan's energies, he expanded the rift between Draenor and Azeroth. Almost immediately, Grommash Hellscream led the tip of the spear of the Horde's invasion forces, the Warsong, the Shattered Hand, the Thunderlord, and the Laughing Skull clans, into the Blasted Lands. These soldiers were joined by Gorefiend and his Death Knights. The orcs began constructing a physical frame around the dimensional rift, which is what you see in front of you, creating a new dark portal that could remain open permanently without the constant need of an influx of power. Kilrog Deadeye and his Bleeding Hollow clans had been watching over the Blasted Lands for any sign of the Horde's return. When they met with Grommash and his Death Knights, informing them of what happened in Azeroth in the Second War, the information would prove invaluable in the days ahead. Gorefiend ordered Kilrog and his people back to Draenor. They had fought for survival since the end of the war, and they deserved time for rest. By the time Danath's meager army arrived at the Dark Portal, the Horde had brought many soldiers to Azeroth. The humans stood little chance against the enemy's superior numbers. Brutal, close-quarters combat erupted across the southern edge of the Blasted Lands. Daneth was the only member of his army to leave the battle alive. He retreated to Netherguard Keep, where he hoped to use its garrison. Despite the earlier defeat, Daneth was confident he could contain the Orcish armies in the region until the rest of the Alliance arrived. He was not wrong. The Orcs did not have the numbers needed to mount a true invasion, but conquest was not their objective this time. The Horde's fearsome soldiers made a show of preparing for a full-scale assault. Meanwhile, Gorefiend and his Death Knights led a hunting party beyond the Blasted Lands in search of artifacts. The group was composed of Death Knights and Orcs, including Chieftain Fenris. Few Alliance soldiers noticed their departure, and none guessed their purpose. Garona did. She began to track them, trying to discern what they were searching for. Deathwing had gone... Deathwing had gone into hiding shortly after the Second War ended. His plan had failed. The Orcs had not conquered Azeroth, but there were some small victories. Much of the Red Dragonflight, along with its leader, Alexstrasza, was still under the Dragon Maw's control. The other aspects had not yet taken action against the Orcs. Most of the dragons feared falling prey to the Demon Soul and suffering Alexstrasza's fate. The human kingdoms had also experienced heavy losses and needed time to recover. When he sensed the rift to Draenor expanding, Deathwing wondered if the Orcs had somehow managed to replenish their numbers for yet another war at full strength. But it soon became clear their invasion was only a feint. Conquest was not their purpose. But Deathwing was intrigued. He decided to take on human form once again, and influence the Alliance's response to the Horde. This tactic had been very effective during the First War. There was actually another political crisis taking place. The Alliance was furious at Alterax's betrayal, and there was much debate on how the kingdom should be punished, or if it deserved to even exist. Lordaeron had become the place where these debates were held. Deathwing returned there in a new human form, calling himself a minor noble named Lord Davil Prester, a distant cousin of King Perinold. Having an apparent connection to Alterac royalty gave his words weight. Prestor advised Lordaeron's king, Taranis, to establish martial law in Alterac until the line of succession could be settled. This move split the attentions of the Alliance army, weakening its response to the Horde's new invasion. The human leaders found Prestor to be charming, endearing, refreshingly pragmatic. He showed no signs of being prickly about the pride of his people. He seemed to have only the best interests of the Alliance at heart. With the Alliance snared in unnecessary turmoil, Deathwing formed his endgame to restore his Black Dragonflight to its former power and glory. The human nations were unlikely to suffer serious damage from the Horde's invasion, thus his plans on Azeroth would not advance. Any attempt to re-establish the Black Dragonflight would be noticed by the Alliance and, more importantly, by the other aspects. Perhaps the solution to that problem did not lie in Azeroth at all. The Orcs' homeworld, Draenor, the other Dragonflights could not threaten Deathwing there. It mattered little that the world was blighted. Dragons did not need to live off the land the same way mortals did. Deathwing moved to make contact with the Horde once again. Now, the next few missions occur all over the place. I've decided just to stay here rather than go all the way up to Dalaran, and all the way over to Alterac, and all the way over to... Yeah, so... we're just going to keep this focus for the moment. As the battle engulfed the Blasted Lands, Gorefiend led the Horde's covert hunting party north. Of the 3 artifacts he sought, he knew only the Book of Medivh's location. He had learned it was in Alterac, a kingdom far from the Dark Portal. Gorefiend's forces quietly traveled to Blackrock Spire to make contact with Blackhand's son, Dalrund and Maim. Through their alliance with the Dragon Maw, they had access to red dragons, and Gorefiend desperately needed these creatures to expedite his journey to Alterac. The meeting was disastrous. Dalrund had declared himself warchief of the true Horde. He considered Ner'zhul a coward and a usurper, and had no intention of helping him with his plans. Gorefiend left empty-handed, but was soon approached by Deathwing. He offered the Death Knights and his allies a deal. He would lend his black dragons to help the Horde retrieve what it needed, and in exchange, the Horde would transport certain precious cargo to Draenor. As a sign of trust, Deathwing told Gorefiend the exact location of the other 2 artifacts, as well as the dangers his forces would face while retrieving them. One was in Dalaran, and the other was in the tomb of Sargeras. Gorefiend was in no position to turn Deathwing down. Probably not Necro. He split his forces into 3 raiding parties. Black dragons would transport them to collect the artifacts immediately. Gorefiend suspected that obtaining the Book of Medivh would be the most difficult of the 3 tasks, so he handled it personally. Deathwing had warned him that Alterac was under martial law, so Gorefiend expected stiff resistance. The Alliance forces occupying the city were utterly unprepared to face dragons and death knights, and when the Horde raiders arrived, most of the soldiers fled in terror. Gorefiend infiltrated the castle and found King Perinold. The human was erratic, boisterous, making demands. His sanity was slipping away, in truth. Deathwing had made sure his distant cousin had lost his mind, so the king could not contradict the lies the dragon was telling Lordaeron. Bemused, Gorefiend humored Perinold's fantasies for a few moments, and then he agreed to wipe out the Alliance occupying force in exchange for the artifact. Such chaos would only help divide humanity's attention, giving him more time to complete his task. With the Book of Medivh in their possession, the Death Knight and his followers left the Mad King alive and made their retreat from the city. Gorefiend kept his word. The Alliance soldiers stationed in Alterac could do little to fight off the Black Dragon's relentless assaults, and the garrison was eradicated. While Gorefiend and his forces were assaulting Alterac, the fighting at Nethergard Keep ground to a bloody stalemate. Turelion had arrived with Alliance reinforcements. Alongside Khadgar and Daneth's forces, they kept the Horde contained, but the humans couldn't shake the suspicion the Orcs were not throwing their full might into the invasion. Alliance scouts stayed on alert for unexpected maneuvers, but none came. The Horde seemed content to test Nethergard's defenses day after day without trying to overwhelm the keep. As the days passed, more and more Alliance reinforcements arrived at the keep, enough to not only defend the walls, but also launch counterattacks against the Horde. The siege was eventually forced back into the empty, open landscape of the Blasted Lands. That should have spelled the end of the invasion, but it didn't. The Orcs continued to fight, maintaining a skirmish line for no apparent reason. They sacrificed warriors to hold or retake useless ground. Khadgar's suspicions grew into an unnerving theory. The Horde were buying time for some other purpose. The invasion was just a distraction. To find answers, Alliance forces captured one of the enemy, brought him back to the keep for interrogation. Turelion led the questioning, calling on the Holy Light to draw out information from the Orc. The captive eventually talked and confirmed what Khadgar feared. The Horde's new leader, Ner'zhul, had no interest in conquest. Small raiding parties had spread across Azeroth under the Alliance's noses, searching for powerful artifacts. There was no telling where they had gone or what they were looking for. North of the Blasted Lands, time was running out for Gorefiend. He'd hoped the other 2 hunting parties had already obtained their artifacts. They hadn't. When he joined his forces that had set out for Dalaran, he was furious to learn they hadn't been able to sense the eye of Dalaran. Deathwing revealed the reason why. Dalaran's Kirin Tor had cast wards on the relics, keeping it from being sensed at a distance. Fortunately for the Horde, the Kirin Tor had no idea they were under scrutiny. They had enchanted the Eye of Dalaran simply because it was important, not because the Magi believed anybody would be foolish enough to try and steal it. Though Gorefiend and his followers could not detect the artifact's exact location, Deathwing was far more sensitive to such things. He instructed the hunters where they could find it, and then gathered his black dragons and assaulted Dalaran's outer defenses, providing a distraction that Gorefiend and a small group of Death Knights could use to sneak out into the city. As Magi rushed to defend their homes from dragons, Gorefiend and his followers crept through Dalaran's streets. Soon enough they had discovered the Eye of Dalaran, locked in an enchanted vault. Gorefiend shattered the containment wards placed around the artifact, and in so doing, attracted unwanted attention. One of the most powerful leaders in the Kirin Tor, Archmage Antonidas, raced to investigate the source of the disturbance. He and a handful of Magi battled the Death Knights in the vault, but the element of surprise was on the Horde side. Gorefiend and his allies killed one of the Magi and escaped with the artifact. Antonidas gave chase for as long as he could, but once the hunters had reunited with the Black Dragons, they vanished into the skies. All the Archmage could do now was to warn Khadgar. The third hunting party could not make the journey to this tomb of Sargeras entirely on the backs of black dragons. The distance was immense, and there were no islands en route to where the creatures could land and rest. Even for Deathwing's mighty servants, such a journey was beyond their ability. The hunters needed to find another way to reach the tomb. They settled on stealing ships from the very same harbor where Warchief Doomhammer had overseen construction of the Horde fleet. The site had fallen under Alliance control and been renamed Menethil Harbor in honor of Lordaeron's king. There were plenty of ships, but many of them were Alliance vessels under the command of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. Despite the risks, the hunters had little choice but to take the ships. Their only advantage was the element of surprise. The Alliance Navy would not expect black dragons and members of the Horde, right? Well, in that they were actually wrong. When Gorefiend had set out on his quest, he had been followed. Garona had kept her distance, observing the Death Knights packed with Deathwing. When the hunting parties had separated in 3 directions, Garona had to choose which to follow. She had shadowed the group that traveled to Menethil Harbor, believing it was seeking out the tomb of Sargeras. As the hunting party planned its assault on the harbor, Garona went to work. She could not warn the humans directly, they wouldn't listen to an orc, but she knew their language well. She scrawled a note about the impending attack, made sure the Alliance would find it. It was a simple matter. She showed herself to the harbor guards, and when they gave chase, she dropped the missive and ran. The incident gained attention immediately. An orc intruder leaving notes was not something seen every day, and the information in it was hard to believe. Yet when the Black Dragon swooped down a few hours later, the humans were not completely unprepared. A bloody confrontation erupted in Menethil Harbor, and the hunting party only managed to steal a few slow ships. They sailed clumsily out to sea while the Black Dragons burned any vessel attempting to pursue. Garona was unable to follow. She traveled quickly as she could back to the Blasted Lands to tell Khadgar what had happened. The voyage to the tomb of Sargeras was slow and miserable, on ships not designed for the open ocean. When the hunting party arrived, they had to fight their way through swarms of demons that had killed Gul'dan, taking great losses. The scepter of Sargeras was indeed inside the tomb, and the hunting party claimed it. It was well worth the journey. The artifact's ability to open rifts in the fabric reality would make it critical to Ner'zhul's efforts back on Draenor. Only a few scant members of the hunting party made the journey back to the Eastern Kingdoms. When the hunters finally reunited with Gorefiend at the Dark Portal, the Death Knight made preparations to return to Draenor. Deathwing had already brought with them enormous carts, loaded with his precious cargo. The objects were large, heavy, and enchanted. Mortal eyes could not see what lay within the crude containers, and magical energy seemed to have no effect on them. The contents were of little concern to Gorefiend. He only wanted to finish his mission. Deathwing was satisfied. The Horde would carry a large clutch of black dragon eggs to Draenor, and soon he would join them to oversee the rebirth of his dragonflight. Aerial weapons, siege, like things like this wonderful ballista are actually quite good against dragons, believe it or not. Let's see if I can go through here. Oh, I can't. Oh, no, I can't. I figured. Gorefiend suspected that after the Horde's latest attack on Azeroth, the Alliance might seek to invade... Wow, that's just a weird sight, isn't it? That one. Might seek to invade Draenor. He left behind a large number of soldiers to prevent this from happening. This force was primarily consistent of Warsong orcs, led by Hellscream, along with the Mok'Nathal Rexxar. Power, I'd imagine, Necro. Skill would probably also be relevant. Their departure was noticed by the Alliance, and it did not bode well. Based on what he had learned from the Archmage Antonidas and Garona, Khadgar had begun piecing together the Horde's objective. Some of it was incomprehensible to him. He knew of dragons, but Deathwing was not a creature most mortals were aware of. But all of it seemed sinister in nature. Khadgar only learned the true scope of the Horde's plan after the Alliance captured a Death Knight. The Archmage bombarded his prisoner with arcane magic, forcing him to reveal what he knew of Ner'zhul's intentions. At last, everything was clear. Ner'zhul and the Horde were planning to escape their dying world by creating new portals, and they had stolen the artifacts to do so. When Khadgar told Turellian of what he'd learned, they both agreed they would not allow the Horde to invade another world. No other land should suffer as Azeroth had. Yet it was possible the Alliance's other heroes wouldn't feel the same way. Launching a campaign into Draenor would require an army, and casualties would be high. Turellian and Khadgar both feared there might not be much of an appetite for battle amongst the soldiers who had already spent years fighting to protect Azeroth. It was time to find out. Turelian raised his banner, declaring he would lead this new army, the Sons of Lothar, into the Orcish homeworld and end the Horde forever. Not all of the Alliance's soldiers heeded the call, but some did. Nearly every one of the Second War's most revered heroes, Illyria Windrunner, Danath Trollbane, Círdan Wildhammer, brought their forces to Netherguard Keep in preparation for war. Garona wanted to join the expedition force, even if it was only in secret. Khadgar knew he could use her knowledge of Draenor to his advantage, but he had a different task for her. They both knew that members of the Shadow Council were still alive on Anzaroth. He convinced the half-orc to stay behind, hunt them down, and kill them all. The Sons of Lothar smashed through Hellscream's warriors, forcing them to scatter to the far corners of the Blasted Lands. With the way clear, the Alliance expedition forces marched through the Dark Portal and laid eyes on Draenor for the first time. The sight shocked them. They stood on land that had once been the Tanaan jungle, now the Hellfire Peninsula, a barren wasteland of red earth stretching into the distance. The Sons of Lothar faced no real resistance in those early days. The Orcish forces had not expected to be chased back to Draenor, but soon word of the invasion spread throughout the Horde. No, stone that was mined here. I mean, there's literally a mine right there, Dakota. See? It's right there. It's right there. Gorefiend brought all of his cargo to Hellfire Citadel, where War Chief Ner'zhul was waiting. By now the Horde had received word that Alliance forces were streaming through the Dark Portal. Time had grown short, and Ner'zhul was anxious to begin. He was stunned, however, to see the full measure of what Gorefiend had brought back. Not only had he obtained the 3 artifacts, but he'd also returned with a large number of suspicious carts. These items belonged to a surprise guest, Deathwing. The Black Dragon and other members of his flight had come through the Dark Portal disguised as orcs so as to not draw attention to themselves. Ner'zhul was initially terrified of Deathwing. Even though the dragon was not wearing his true form, he radiated immense power. Deathwing sensed the potent skull of Gul'dan and Ner'zhul's presence, and he demanded it for himself. The war chief balked at this request, but only for a moment. He was in no position to resist a creature like Deathwing, and he had no further need of the skull. Its purpose had been to reopen the Dark Portal. Deathwing was interested in using the skull's lingering energies to strengthen his dragonflight and accelerate the growth of his eggs and whelps. As a token of friendship, Deathwing left a portion of his black dragons with the Horde to protect Hellfire Citadel against the Alliance invasion. With the skull of Gul'dan in his possession, Deathwing left Hellfire Citadel. He settled on Gorgrond as a suitable place to hide his clutch of black dragon eggs. Meanwhile, Ner'zhul put his own plans into action. The gathered artifacts would grant him enough power to open portals to other worlds, but he needed to find a place to begin the ritual. The Dark Portal's location had been chosen because it rested on a convergence of magical ley lines, but now that was in Alliance hands. The only other nexus of ley lines that Ner'zhul knew about was the site of the Black Temple. He ordered the bulk of the Horde to accompany him to that location. The war chief left Kargath Bladefist and the Shattered Hand at Hellfire Citadel to hold the Alliance army at bay. Yeah, I know, right, Necro? Khadgar and Turelian both agreed that stopping Ner'zhul was their highest priority. If he was to fall, the Horde's plan to escape to other worlds would collapse. Believing that Ner'zhul was still in Hellfire Citadel, the Sons of Lothar launched an all-out offensive against the stronghold. Chieftain Bladefist and the Shattered Hand had dug in at the Citadel for a siege. The Horde had hoped to hold off the Alliance for a week. Their defenses fell before the first day ended. Even with the help of black dragons, Kargath simply had no means to repel simultaneous attacks from dwarf griffin riders in the sky and soldiers in the ground. Once Khadgar and his fellow Magi joined the fray, Kargath had to abandon his position and flee into the wastes. The Sons of Lothar were victorious, but they had no time to rejoice. The presence of the black dragons at the Hellfire Citadel was an ill omen. What was worse, Khadgar had discovered that Ner'zhul had marched southwest with the rest of his Horde and most of the potent artifacts. Strangely, the Archmage did not sense the skull of Gul'dan moving with them. He felt its presence somewhere in the north. Khadgar knew the Sons of Lothar could not simply focus on Ner'zhul. The Archmage needed that skull to destroy Draenor's side of the Dark Portal. After much debate, Turelian decided to split his forces. One half would track down the Skull of Gul'dan, and the other would apprehend Ner'zhul and the other artifacts in his possession. Khadgar, Turelion, and Illyria Windrunner led the forces that sought out the Skull of Gul'dan to the north, while Daneth and Kurdran pursued Ner'zhul to the south. The chaos of the coming battles would soon overwhelm both sides of the war. Yeah, interesting, isn't it, Necro? Starting to wonder what the hell's going to happen. Again, we won't actually have a real answer till the next book, which kind of infuriates me. I was like, God damn it, I got to wait another year. Let's go this way. I mean, there's a battle happening at Auchindoun and a battle happening at this place, so it takes too long to get from point A to point B. What do you want from me, guys? Ner'zhul and the other orcs were disappointed to hear how fast Hellfire Citadel had fallen, but they were already at a considerable head start on the Alliance. The Horde knew this land, and they were moving quickly. It didn't seem possible their enemies could catch up to them. Unfortunately for Ner'zhul, Kurdran Wildhammer and his Griffin Riders had decided to scout ahead. They found the Warchief and his small army at the edges of the Bone Wastes, west of Shadowmoon Valley. Well, that's weird. Which is actually that way, as I said earlier. The dwarves rained hell upon the orcs, bombarding them with impunity. You know what's great. Unless Ner'zhul and his people found a safer route to the Black Temple, they would soon die. There was only one such path nearby, through the Draenei tomb city of Auchindoun. Much of the holy site was now in ruins, but many of its crypts and its tunnels were still intact. During the Horde's war against the Draenei, Gorefiend had learned much about Auchindoun. He knew about little-used passageways that led towards Shadowmoon Valley, passageways that Ner'zhul and his forces could travel through to elude the Sons of Lothar and get closer to their destination. Auchindoun was a haunted and twisted place. It would not be safe to enter, but Ner'zhul had no alternative. He led his forces into the tomb. The Griffin Riders launched a bold new attack, one they would soon regret. Kurdran was knocked from his mount and captured by the Horde. Before the other dwarves could rescue him, he was taken into Auchindoun's darkened corridors. Kilrogg Deadeye interrogated Kurdran, hoping to learn about the Alliance's true numbers. The dwarf held his tongue, even under unspeakable torture. Daneth's Trollbane's forces were not far away. When they arrived at Auchindoun, some of the Griffin Riders explained the situation. It would be very dangerous to rescue Kurdran. In Auchindoun's tight quarters, a large force was little more effective than a small one, and the orcs knew the terrain. They would be capable of outmaneuvering Daneth, no matter how many troops he brought with them. An unexpected source of aid presented itself. An outcast Arakoa named Grizig had been following the Sons of Lothar as they pursued the Horde south. He had no love for the Horde. Years ago, Chieftain Kargath had toppled the High Arakoan capital, Skyreach. His orcs had killed nearly all of its inhabitants and had captured High Arakoa and tossed them into the cursed Sethek Hollow. Grizig was one of those unfortunate prisoners. He emerged into Sethek Hollow as an outcast, warped, twisted by the region's shadowy energies. Eager for vengeance, Grizig offered to lead the Alliance through Auchindoun. Guided by the Arakoa, Daneth and his soldiers stormed through the tomb city. They moved carefully, avoiding Horde ambushes, and methodically searched Auchindoun. In time, they liberated Kurdran. Yet Ner'zhul was nowhere to be found. Only Kilrogg and the remains of the Bleeding Hollows stalked Auchindoun. They had volunteered to occupy the Alliance, while the rest of the Horde escaped to the Black Temple. It was not simply nobility that drove Kilrogg to make this sacrifice. Years ago, he had performed a ritual that granted him a vision of his own death. He now realized Auchindoun was the place where he would breathe his last breath. The Bleeding Hollow fell upon the Alliance forces. As blood was spilled across Auchindoun, Daneth confronted Kilrogg. The two engaged in a brutal duel that echoed throughout the tomb's city halls until Daneth plunged his blade through the orc's throat. With the chieftain dead, the rest of the Bleeding Hollow scattered or surrendered. Kilrogg's sacrifice was not in vain. He had given Ner'zhul the time he would need to safely reach the Black Temple with the rest of the Horde. And yeah, by the way, Twitch has been weird all week. I'm sorry. There's literally nothing I can do about it. On the local recording, it's fine. What do you want from me? I really hope Twitch is a little more better behaving next week when we're going through Andromeda, huh? Gorgrond was an inhospitable terrain. The perfect place for Deathwing to build a refuge from those who could not fly. He and his black dragons swooped down on mountains in force, seeking out safe places for his eggs. Though the land was barren, it was not unoccupied. Gorgrond was home to the Grahn who had survived Draenor's slow decay. The mightiest of these giants was known as Gruul. He lorded over a number of ogres and lesser Grahn who dwelled in the mountains. Gruul's kind were highly territorial, not prone to living in close proximity one to another, but the calamities that had befallen Draenor had changed them. The Grahn now joined forces in order to survive. Gruul and his followers had no intention of allowing intruders to conquer their home. They fought back, surprising the black dragons with their ferocity. God, I'm at 6% frame drop right now, which is insanely high. I'll take that as a positive, Larian. Deathwing ignored the Grahn, seeing them as a little more than pests. Let's see, we're going to have to go this way. Seeing them as little more than pests, he focused on finding a number of hiding places for his unhatched children, while the rest of his dragonflight focused on the native creatures. His arrogance led to the ruination of his plans. While Deathwing was distracted, the Sons of Lothar arrived in Gorgrond, searching for the skull of Gul'dan. The Alliance soldiers were deeply unsettled by what they found. Battles between black dragons and Grahn had resulted in many deaths. Gruul and his followers, which we'll showcase in a second here, had taken to impaling slain enemies on spikes, displaying their corpses to all. The Grahn nearly turned on the Sons of Lothar with violence. Yeah, here you go. This is probably one of my favorite things in BC, by the way. The black dragons who are, well, I mean, you can see for yourself, can't you? There's a nice shot of him. The Grahn nearly turned on the Sons of Lothar with violence, but Khadgar and Turelion were quickly able to demonstrate that the Alliance was also the enemy of the Black Dragonflight. They struck a simple bargain with Gruul. If he gave them safe passage through Gorgrond, they would help him fight Deathwing. The Grahn and the Alliance prepared an ambush at the largest cache of Deathwing's eggs, nestled in one of Gorgrond's barren valleys. The Sons of Lothar wasted little time, destroying as many of the unguarded eggs as they could, hoping to lure Deathwing into the open. When Deathwing learned of their actions, he and his draconic followers appeared in the skies and unleashed their molten fury on the intruders. It was just the moment that they had been waiting for. The massive Grahn scaled Gorgrond's mountains to battle Deathwing with his bare fists. Now, I don't know if he's going to be here. There you go. I've been meaning to show you what a Grahn looks like. There's Grulok, one of Gruul's Grahn. By the way, what's with the Power Ranger thing? What's the relevance? Meanwhile, Khadgar lashed Deathwing with arcane power, ripping apart the metal plates bolted to the Black Dragon Aspect's spine. Deathwing's body began to come apart. Molten energies spilt forth from his broken form, spilling fire and magma across Gorgrond. The pain was so great it forced him to drop the skull of Gul'dan. If he had taken only a few more wounds, he might have died on Draenor that day. Instead, Deathwing abandoned his plans, flying straight to Azeroth through the Dark Portal and over the heads of many startled Alliance soldiers. Deathwing would never forget what happened to them that day. He swore vengeance on those who attacked him, particularly Khadgar. As fighting continued between the Grahn and the other Black Dragons, Khadgar and the rest of the Sons of Lothar collected the skull of Gul'dan. Then they beat a hasty retreat, fearing that Gruul and his followers would turn on them once they had beat the Black Dragons. When the fighting in Gorgrond was done, most of the Black Dragons were dead or dying. Gruul reasserted his dominion over the land. His battle with Deathwing earned him new respect amongst his followers, and he would become known as the Dragon Killer. Sorry, got AFK because of a stupid dog. BRB. Having recovered the skull of Gul'dan, Turelian turned his forces south. Shadowmoon Valley was far, but he had magic to help him expedite the journey. No, Deathwing fled back to Azeroth Fallout. And most of the Black Dragons died, killed by Gruul and the Gron. Shadowmoon Valley was far, but he had magic to help expedite his journey. Khadgar and his fellow Magi opened up a series of portals through which the Sons of Lothar reached southern Draenor. Which, hell, at this point, I might not even make it in time, because it's way over there. Outside the Black Temple, the two halves of the Alliance army reunited. Yet they had not reached the city in time to stop Ner'zhul. What was worse, the Horde had prepared for their arrival. The remnants of the Orcish army had dug in around the Black Temple to keep the Sons of Lothar back. Much to Khadgar's dismay, he sensed potent energies lashing out from atop the Black Temple. Ner'zhul and his followers were in the midst of preparing their spell to open new portals. There was no time for a drawn-out siege, no time to find a way around the Black Temple's guardians. The Sons of Lothar launched themselves at the city and crashed into the defenders. While the battle raged, Khadgar and his fellow Magi hunted for Ner'zhul, hoping to reach him in time and disrupt his spell work. They would not succeed. Atop the city's largest tower, Ner'zhul had gathered some of the Death Knights and a number of Shadowmoon orcs to help him with the spellwork and protect him from the Alliance. He and his followers had harnessed the power of the Eye of Dalaran, the Book of Medivh, and the Scepter of Sargeras. Ner'zhul tapped into the nexus of ley lines beneath the Black Temple, and the scepter... but he was woefully unprepared for the amount of skill needed for this ritual. Remember, Ner'zhul's a shaman, and as this has been highlighting, he's still a shaman. He never became a warlock. I mean, Drekthar became a warlock, but Ner'zhul never became a warlock. Ner'zhul never became a mage. Ner'zhul was a shaman who hasn't been practicing in years. It's kind of like if you came to me right now and handed me a sword and actually made me fight a really skilled combatant. I mean, I might have been able to at least lose gracefully like 10, 15 years ago before all my injuries and health problems and back when I was practiced in sword fighting, but giving that to me now, I'm just going to make a fool of myself, which is what Ner'zhul did. He was desperate to succeed at his task, and his recklessness caused the energies at his command to spiral completely out of control. As planned, Ner'zhul blasted multiple holes through the fabric of reality, but they were followed by others. Many others. The magic that Ner'zhul had unleashed destabilized Draenor's ley lines. Hey, they stole that from me and Primus. Unimaginable forces began to tear open rifts across Draenor. With each passing moment, the world groaned louder in upheaval. Fissures erupted across land and sea. Khadgar and the other Magi arrived just as this chain reaction was unfolding. They managed to recover the Eye of Dalaran and the Book of Medivh, but not the Scepter of Sargeras. With the artifact in hand, Ner'zhul and a few of his closest followers escaped into the nearest portal. Ner'zhul had saved himself, but doomed his world. And that's the last we'll hear about Ner'zhul in this book. Yeah, obviously not. Necro. Khadgar had recovered most of the stolen artifacts, but the damage to Draenor had already been done. The unstable rifts opening across the land would soon shatter the world and almost certainly kill everyone on it, which is funny. A lot of people survived, really, but they didn't know that. Even worse, the destructive energies would blast through the dark portal into Azeroth. After consulting with Turelian, Khadgar knew what needed to be done. The Sons of Lothar would have to destroy the dark portal to protect their homeworld, and they would have to do so from Draenor. With chaos unfolding all around, there was no time to gather on Azeroth and perform the task there. It was a suicide mission, but no one hesitated. Energies lashed about the world and hampered Khadgar's own magical abilities, preventing him from creating a portal to Hellfire Peninsula. He and his allies were forced to use griffins to reach the dark portal. Khadgar, Turelian, Illyria, Kurdran, Daneth, and a number of other expedition members made the journey. Most of the Alliance soldiers stationed at Hellfire Citadel had already retreated back to Azeroth, but now the remnants of the Horde were scrambling through the Dark Portal as well, and the Orcs were none too pleased to see that someone had come too close to close off their only means of fleeing. The two sides crashed together outside the yawning gateway in a desperate attempt to escape oblivion. As the battle raged, Khadgar and the other Magi unleashed the raw power contained within the skull of Gul'dan. Trying to touch as little of its fell essence as possible, Turellian and his forces encircled the sorcerers and fended off the terrified orcs who sought to flee from their world. The mage's spellwork ignited a massive explosion that destroyed the Dark Portal's stone frame and severed the bridge between Azeroth and Draenor. There was little time to savor the victory. The magical stress unleashed by Ner'zhul's spell was still spreading throughout the world and was growing more destructive by the moment. As violent earthquakes shook the land and continents fell away, Khadgar and the Sons of Lothar ran through an open rift nearby, not knowing where it would take them or whether they would survive. Draenor, the realm touched by Agrimar, shaped by primals and breakers, realm of the glorious Apexis, was no more. And now there was only Outland. The orcs who had escaped through the Dark Portal before it closed brought grim tidings to the Horde on Azeroth. Their homeworld was gone. Ner'zhul had sacrificed everyone to save himself and a handful of his loyal followers. It seemed impossible that anyone else could have survived Draenor's destruction. For Chieftain Grommash, this news was devastating. His only surviving family, his son, Garrosh, had still been on Draenor. In the Maghar camps of Nagrand, Grommash put aside his grief, led his Warsong clan north to take shelter in the isolated Swamp of Sorrows. He was not giving up. He was merely regrouping. Grommash believed there would never be peace between orcs and humans, and he wanted the fighters to be ready for battle. The members of the True Horde, the Dark Horde, regarded the news about Draenor as confirmation that they were rightful successors to Warchief Blackhand's rule. In the years to come, Dalrend and Maim would strengthen their forces, and that's actually it for them. One moment. You don't like the Apexis? Yeah, I know, right, Permeus? I never really thought Grom was a bad father, to be honest. It's just, we never really got to see it, you know? The Dragon Maw in Grim Batol would do much the same. Zulahed and many of their clan had returned to Draenor at the end of the Second War, but with news of the homeworld's destruction, the Dragon Maw on Azeroth believed their leader was dead. Nekros took command over his people, ordered them to continue lording over Alexstrasza and her red dragons within Grim Batol. And the Night Elves who are in Stormwind, because that's natural. Other members of the Horde saw no reason to keep fighting the Alliance. The noble Mok'Nathal, Rexxar, believed his people had perished on Draenor, and was disgusted by everything that had transpired in the recent events. His loyalties were now dust. Rexxar retreated into Azeroth's wilds, and he wandered the world in solitude, and would not be heard again for quite a while, actually. Tucked away in the Alterac Mountains, Drekthar and the Frostwolf clan carved out a new home. They isolated themselves from the other orcs in the hopes of escaping the Alliance's wrath. It was a harsh and lonely existence, but not without its benefits. Drekthar had rekindled his connection with the elements, and he used them to keep his people safe. Far from the Eastern Kingdoms, Cho'Gall and the Twilight's Hammer clan knew nothing of Draenor's fate, and even if it had, it wouldn't have mattered. The whispers of the old gods were calling to them. Cho'Gall and his followers sailed towards the distant continent of Kalimdor in search of their dark masters, eager to help bring about the Hour of Twilight. They did not know they were being followed. Garona had picked up Cho'Gall's trail, and she tracked the former Shadow Council members to the mysterious land of Kalimdor, and was definitely not pregnant. Many of the orcs who fled Draenor surrendered immediately to the Alliance in the Blasted Lands. They were carted off to internment camps that had sprung up around Lordaeron. Amongst the Alliance nations, debate still raged about what to do with the prisoners. Yet most of the Alliance's attention was not on the orcs, but on the Dark Portal. Some of their greatest leaders and heroes had not returned from the expedition. Accounts from a few sons of Lothar who had come back painted a grim picture, but there was still hope that one day Torellian, Khadgar, Illyria, Kurdran, Daneth, and their followers might return. In the days, weeks, and months, and years, that hope faded. The missing soldiers were presumed dead. Statues of the missing soldiers were erected in the gates of Stormwind City, so all citizens would receive a daily reminder of those who had made the ultimate sacrifice in order to save their world. Plaques were affixed to the statues, bearing messages from the leaders' friends, comrades, and loved ones. And there's actually a nice picture here of Sylvanas visiting the statue of her sister right here. Nice touch. It would be decades before anyone on Azeroth learned the truth of what had happened. In the meantime, the people of the Eastern Kingdom settled into their new lives. The First and Second Wars had far-reaching repercussions, altering the balance of power across the land. The Council of Tirisfal was no more. The concept of a single guardian imbued with great power abandoned. Azeroth had new protectors. The most prominent was the Alliance. Even though the Horde was defeated... Even though the Horde was defeated, the Alliance's members saw no purpose in disbanding the faction. They would maintain their ties, sharing resources and military strength to protect the world. The Paladins of the Silver Hand also dedicated themselves to safeguarding the land. Only Torellian had journeyed to Draenor. He had told his comrades to stay behind. The Paladins soon trained new holy warriors in their ways, and the ranks of the righteous order swelled. Elsewhere, the Kirin Tor of Dalaran studied the imprisoned orcs and their magics. The Magi knew the elements of the Horde were still lurking throughout the Eastern Kingdoms. They wanted to learn as much as they could about their enemy, in the event another war broke out. And just as on primordial Draenor, on countless other worlds throughout the cosmos, war had changed Azeroth and its people forever, but there was more turmoil to come. In the years ahead, Azeroth would need the Alliance and other protectors to survive. Ladies and gentlemen, Warcraft Chronicles Volume 2. I hope you have enjoyed. My throat has been screaming for the last couple of days. But nevertheless, I hope you have enjoyed this particular trip and our semi-interactive background we've been using. And I'm going to go take a rest now. I hope to see you tonight, tomorrow, and next Tuesday.